Hey everyone. So for those who don't know, my name is Dan Hermes. I'm part of developer relations here at Google. I support the content API for shopping as well as the search API for shopping, and I'm a member of a larger team that supports all the commerce APIs here at Google. Today, May 16th, we're here to talk about the content API for shopping. We don't have any sort of agenda, but based on the faces and names I see, I'm sure we'll have plenty to chat about. Like I said before, if there is an issue with reverb of my voice, let me know, and I can deal with that. So before I open up the floor for questions, I have some questions for you guys, namely one question that could lead to some discussion. And I was chatting with my team this week and thinking of ways we can spice this this bi-weekly event up. And I was just wondering if there were any particular types of people that you guys would like to see in this hangout, like the engineers that work on the API, if they could come in and be guest stars every once in a while, or maybe if there's sales, or maybe if there's people from ops like we had 4 weeks ago at the hangout before last. So any suggestions from the floor?
Hi Daniel, it's John Strachan here.
How you doing?
Hi, what about the team that does the exceptions?
Okay.
Okay.
So, no, I know what you're saying. So you mean exceptions, something we discussed at a previous hangout for those who didn't see it. Exceptions or acceptances for accounts and things like that, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I can look into. I don't have that strong relationship with those folks, but I can definitely check it out. It'd certainly be helpful to have some preset questions before we have a guest like that show up, but I'll look into it. Anything else?
Danny, is that the same as the data quality folks?
The data quality folks, it's a pretty distributed team. There are engineering folks. There's a support part of that. I'd be happy to get either one. I actually quite like the engineering folks who work on that. There, it's a big team in Zurich, and also the API team for this API in particular is also in Zurich. But that's something we'd look into. I know you were wanting more parity between what you get from the data quality feed and what you see in the merchant center, and that's something our direct engineers would have an impact on. Is there something else you were thinking of when requesting those folks?
Yeah, actually, it just seems to me, the one meeting I attended, there was probably 2 or 3 different times where you said, I'm not the data quality, so I can't really answer that question with authority.
Right.
So it just seems like a lot of those questions come up, and I think they would benefit me even if I don't have the question.
Sure.
Because that data quality is definitely one of the more complicated and concerning pieces of the...
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe we could just have like an out of band rather than a bi-weekly hanging out. We could have a dedicated sort of Q&A mixed with a bit of lecturing on data quality. But that's a great suggestion. Andrew, looks like you're about to talk.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure about a specific guest request, but I would be interested in hearing about like new features, what you guys are working on. I mean, I don't know how much you guys like to talk about that sort of stuff, but if you have like project managers or something, even if it's just for things like the Merchant Center, like new graphs or feedback or whatever.
Yeah, we do have a PM. I will sync up with those folks and see how much they're willing to reveal. The thing about doing something like that is, unless it's pretty close to production, it's sort of, you're making false promises sometimes, because sometimes something will be halfway along and get deprioritized, and even though it'll only take a couple weeks of work, there's nobody working on it for those couple weeks and things like that. But I'll certainly look into it and ask the PM what he thinks about coming to this. There are sort of 2 different PMs involved with the Content API, both of whom are pretty interesting dudes. So I will add them to the list of requested guests. Anything else?
Another thing that I don't know how many other people in this hangout have experience with this, but another thing that we do is we use our content feeds for AdWords and other, like Google Affiliate Network and places like that. It might be kind of cool to have one of those guys in at some point to, talk about, what they're doing with the feeds, what
Sure.
they like, what kind of metadata they care about, because I know it's sort of different than what is used in the content for shopping, or what's used in the Google Shopping experience.
Right. Yeah, there is a wealth of other attributes that you can send, as Andrew knows, and Andrew has probably sent just about every possible attribute you could send that teams at Google are parsing in one way or another. And I can certainly look into getting those people on, or if not getting them on, possibly getting some sort of interview that I could play for everyone with them about those things. Because there are, like Andrew said, there are a lot of extra things you can do with targeting and enable some of that within your feeds. Well, that's great. So now let's open the floor back up like we usually do. There were no specific questions again this time, but last week we didn't, or 2 weeks ago we didn't have any specific questions and still went 45 minutes. So I think we'll be all right. So I'd say the first questions we should jump on are the OAuth 2 questions that have been bouncing around with Luke and Caroline. So if you guys want to ask those or give a recap, and then we can jump in.
Well, the old client login is going to depreciate in like 3 years, right? So this is not
right
on top of us.
Yes, it's deprecating in 3 years. Client login, auth sub, and OAuth 1.0 are 3 of, I believe, the only 4 methods Google supports for authentication, but I don't know, there might be more than the 4. But it was announced about a month ago that those 3 methods will be deprecated over a 3-year period. So you're right, it's not that urgent, but given the fact that it will be going away, especially for you, Luke, as you're building a user base, and you're not really at critical mass yet. The more users you have on something, the harder it is to switch, right?
Well, no, I mean, I'm server to server, so I have to use the JWT server to server pattern, right?
Not necessarily. If you're just using your MCA, you can get a refresh and access token one time, and you can do that server side. There's a special redirect URI that isn't actually a website. It's like OOB colon. It's a colon delimited string of 6 things, and you can do that one time. Get your refresh token and your access token just for your account, your MCA that's making all the requests, and you can go server to server all you want. I'm not entirely sure what the server to server stuff that Caroline was hoping to get out of that, but for you, if you don't actually need refresh and access tokens from every user, if you're just creating sub accounts with your MCA for each of your users, you only need 1 refresh token, and as long as you on your account never revoke that refresh token, you can use it ad infinitum to get a new access token every time another access token expires. And then from there, if you find a way, I was just reading about this. There's no preset way to serialize the data with the .NET client library, but there is with every other library. But they're public attributes. There are public getters and setters for everything you want. Everything you want. So, before you kill your process, if you save those tokens somewhere safe and secure, then you can start a process back up, reinstantiate an OAuth 2 parameters class, or at least in the .NET case, and then just use the getters or use the setters to set that refresh token. Then everything else happens under the covers. When that code snippet that's been bouncing around the forums for .NET, and with every client library, that is, if you set up your request factory or your service or your client object, whatever the local term is for it, whatever's doing the work of making and sending the request, if you set it up with an OAuth 2 token, it handles everything else under the covers. As long as you have a refresh token, you don't have to worry about it. Because what the client will do, it'll try to make a request. If it succeeds, it succeeds. If it fails, then it'll get a 401 back, which means unauthorized. It knows it's unauthorized, so then it tries to make a refresh request to get a new a new access token using the refresh token, and then it'll send a third request, that being to retry the original request to the API, and then if that gets rejected, then it will send an error. But like I said, all that happens under the covers. You don't need to worry about it. All you need, especially in the case of an MCA, Luke, is one refresh token, and everything else just kind of happens.
Okay, I didn't know that you had an interfaceless. I could make a post to an interfaceless system that would then respond with the token. I didn't know.
Yeah,
that.
you can do that. It's server-side OAuth 2 is what they call it, and it's the server-side flow. It's not quite server to server, but you can do server-side OAuth 2. And what you'll do there is you retrieve. You'll just get a code back. So there's a redirect that we offer when you use that redirect URI, a Google-hosted redirect, and on that page they just have a text box with the code that you need, and that code is what you exchange. That code only lasts 10 minutes. Whereas an access token lasts an hour. That code is a very short-lived code that you can use to exchange for a refresh token and an access token. But if you just search for server-side OAuth 2 flow, it's in that document that I just posted to the thread. But if you want to ping the forum if you're having trouble, I can certainly point you in a more specific direction. Caroline, does that seem like it's... Sorry, Luke, did you have a problem?
I just want to ask a question about that last point. When you bring in these guests, will we be told, 2 weeks in advance who's going to show up? Okay.
When I announce the Hangout, I'll announce. It may not be 2 weeks in advance, but it'll be 10 days in advance, 8 days in advance, something like that.
Okay.
So Caroline, is that sort of sounding more like what you were looking for, or were you really needing this server-to-server flow?
I think so. I'm just trying to find where you're looking in the documentation, because what I had certainly didn't, the redirect URI was a page where a user would, acknowledge and consent to that, and we have, 200 plus merchants. To have that kind of setup every time we need to add somebody to this,
Well, so it depends on your setup. Luke's setup, he's using a multi-client account, and he creates a sub-account for each of his users, and then he can just administer those accounts using his own logged-in credentials, because his MCA is apparent for all those sub-accounts. If you have individual accounts for each of your merchants, one, I would recommend going to an MCA, but two, you're going to have to get their authentication somehow to make requests on their behalf, and asking them for their passwords is not good, right? So you're right.
It's less than ideal, but the way it's been done in the past, it's not inconsistent with what we've had to do in the past, right? Because this is a relatively new model, too. So
Sure.
We've been doing this for 10 years, with Frugal and all that.
Wow, that's remarkable. Yes, I don't believe OAuth has been around that long.
And OAuth 1 was, as
Hard
my
to
boss said, just use OAuth 1 and hack it and be done with it. Because OAuth 1 apparently had a number of issues, right? I mean, he's kidding.
Yeah, it was just, the flow is a little less intuitive. There were more parts to it. And I think one of the big issues with OAuth 1 is that you had infinite life access tokens. And it's the same thing with client login. Well, actually, no, that's not true anymore with client login. But there's sort of, some problems with giving access forever rather than giving the ability to refresh forever and things like that.
So the way the documentation is written certainly suggests we are a server-to-server candidate. But that said, it does not seem like even in the libraries it's supported too well. There's a lot of, complaints about things not working appropriately in their respective libraries.
That's one of the more exotic flows, and honestly, I don't think it's that necessary. I don't know how you're currently authenticating new users, but it'd be as easy as, do you want to sign up, and then it's just one extra page they go through.
Yeah, they typically talk to one of our ECI representatives who walks them through everything, because we can have very different, people that different technical backgrounds. One of my concerns with doing a multi-client account is we're a software as a service, so we don't have a website, we don't have a merchant account as a company. It's all our merchants have merchants accounts.
Right.
So the master one is always the master and all the children, and it wasn't clear how to obtain a master account that wasn't tied to a website that had e-commerce platform.
Sure. Okay.
So we don't want to take one random merchant, make them the master, and then...
No, it would be your own sub-account, but the fact that you don't have a website may be an issue there.
We have a website, but not an e-commerce website.
Right. I don't know. I think with marketplaces, you would need an e-commerce site, but there are other types of multi-client accounts that don't necessarily need to be a marketplace.
So that's one reason that we held back. The second reason is obviously the quota is per merchant account, and it's actually would bite us worse as a master account than, right, we'd more than likely have to get our quotas upped, whereas if we just use the separate merchant accounts, our quotas will be higher and we shouldn't run into that as much.
In that case, if your quota volume is high and you're meeting it, and they're legitimate requests, if you're not doing something where you're being spammy, or you're being you're sending more requests than you need to, or something like that, we'll bump your quota. There are no issues there. And if there are issues, then we'll help you get your number of requests down so you're not hitting the quota. So it's
but using separate accounts, I would unlikely have to bump it, right? Well, I mean, it's fine. It's something we would definitely look at if there's a way to have a master account that is not attached to an e-commerce website.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but let me write that down, actually.
Well, Caroline, my site isn't an e-commerce website, and it was approved as an NCA account. So.
We tried to get our demo sites approved, and we just kept getting shot down. And whoever the nameless, faceless person on the other side of the drop was not giving us any help at all.
I had the same problem until Sir Danny stepped in.
So we just went and got our merchant account and said, okay, you're going to be the beta merchant. We'll just start with you. I mean, we got sort of frustrated. We tried for probably a month to get our something done, particularly so we could use it as a test platform, because we have test e-commerce sites that wouldn't damage anything as well. So
as a test platform, that's actually against the terms. But what we do with the API, offer the dry run flag.
Right, the dry run, which is what I've been using. Yeah.
Yep. But we can certainly, off this hangout, you and I, Caroline, link up about doing an MCA if you're interested, and I can certainly help with those channels that you said weren't that helpful. Because I agree, there are times where the sign-up flow and things like that are not as intuitive, or I don't know.
Probably get a kick out of the email, Danny. I'll send it to you. It was pretty entertaining, actually.
Okay.
It was a two-step process for us. I mean, not only did they decline when we first tried, they also turned off our API access. So I had to go back to Danny twice.
Right.
It's finally done.
Yep. So, with that said, to conclude that whole arc, I think OAuth 2 server side is a pretty viable flow. But again, you're going to have to make that decision. The docs are a little hard to digest, but I think after you implement it, the docs are a lot easier to digest after you try it out a few times.
I think you're just looking at a different doc than I am, because there's certainly none that suggests that there's a generic redirect URI you can use. So I just can't find the right doc.
So maybe I'll reread that and find out if it's in there. When you actually go into the Google API's console to actually get your client ID and your client secret to do OAuth 2, by default, it's server-side OAuth 2. And you have to actually change the setting to set your own redirect URI. By default, it's actually set to be...
Oh, see, I didn't even do that. I just did the server-to-server, because that seemed like the appropriate one from the documentation.
Yeah, so if it's the server-side OAuth, actually either using localhost, which you need to do, your library needs to support that. So localhost isn't really the one you want to use, but it's it's something like EEB colon. You know what? Let me mute myself and type. Find what it is. Not that it matters that much, but I'll be right back. But
yeah, it doesn't matter. You can just post it later too. It's not that critical. It does make me question why we have a server-to-server option when it doesn't appear to be supported or encouraged. It's like, why is that there?
Have any of you guys read the OAuth 2 spec to see if message signing is still part of the... I haven't done OAuth 2, I've only done OAuth 1. No?
The service accounts, that last piece I'm talking about, definitely includes an RSA hash signature.
For the header or for the whole message?
Just the payload. The header's encoded, 64 encoded, and then the payload is signed. Actually, no, the header and the payload are signed.
Right.
And then so you send the header, the payload, and then the signed header and payload, all as one.
That's the point
parameter.
of the RSA, is that you can encode the payload.
Well, I mean, they could just use the transport layer security to make sure that it,
Yep.
But I guess they decided to go the more complicated for me way.
Sure.
But using that first method that Danny talked about, it's almost seamless. There's really no encryption. I mean, that's all handled in the library.
Yeah,
right,
I'll have to
Danny?
look and see if there's a good library that I can use that, because I'm sure that the Google Client library for this uses it, but we did some custom code, so.
Okay.
So all
the source is open source. So if you need to pull parts into your own custom stuff, the source is still out in the wild. It's not just a bunch of executables floating around or binaries, So I did find that string. It is URN :IETF :WG :OAuth :2.0 :OOB. Not that anyone should remember that, but that's approximately what it looks like. And before we get to our next question, I just want to say, I see we have 2 viewers outside the Hangout. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only 6 of us right now, so we have 4 open spots if you want to actually join the Hangout and not just watch from afar in a Hangout on air. If you prefer to watch the Hangout on air, that's fine as well. Anyhow, on to our next question. Bueller. Anyone?
I have my usual question.
Okay.
Or 2. I did get an exception for items that include group item ID must not have multiple values, and this is because a merchant was trying to submit 2 colors. And the way I take them is as a comma-separated list, and then I just parse them out of the comma-separated list and submit them separately. So how do you want that submitted? If it's like blue, white, blue, red, do you want blue, comma, white, or slashes, or?
Well, so if it's like they have 4 different shirts, or sorry, they have 4 of the same shirt that are all in 4 different colors, that's one case. Or if they have a shirt that has 4 different colors, that's another case. So which one do you mean?
Well, it's like, let's just take an example of 2. You have 2 shirts, and they're each multicolored, but they're 2 colors, like it's a blue and white shirt and a blue and red shirt.
Right.
And you can only submit the attribute for the color one time.
Right.
So you want blue, comma, white, blue, comma, red, or blue space white, blue space red.
So this is sort of an amalgam of everything, right? So if you just had a shirt that was both blue and white, a multicolored shirt, then you would submit blue/white, right? Now, for this particular product, you have a shirt that sells blue-white and a shirt that sells red-white. So you could submit 2 different products with the exact same data, one blue-white, one red-white. And we actually have support for this through variant IDs. And that's actually... but
I mean, not like that, though. I mean, the shirt itself has 2 different colors in it. So you're submitting 1 color attribute for 1 product, but you want to put 2 colors in the attribute.
Right. So what the docs say, whether you're using the API or whether you're using data feeds, you sort of need to pick a dominant color, and then from there list the rest after it. But like the example we have in our example XML in our docs says, I think, red/blue. But in the single attribute, you would do blue/white. So SCP :color red/white.
Gotcha.
Blue/white.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, so color actually, before we made the big switch to all the variant IDs, you used to be able to send more than one color, but now you can only send one color. But read up on variant IDs. We can discuss a little more if you have specific questions. But
yeah, I'm already using variant IDs. So,
oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'm doing all that. I'd gotten this weird error about how you can't submit them as separate color values.
Yep, you need to submit one color, and then, like I said, if there are two multicolored versions of the same shirt, then you would need to submit them as separate variants under the same variant ID.
And I have a stupid question. Are digital downloads considered hard product that we can list? So, you see what I mean? Because if it's like, let's say you have a report, and it's a bound report, right? Well, that's something you ship, and so that's a hard product. But what if you want to offer a digital download version? Could that also be listed with the API because it's a digital product?
I don't know why not. I don't know the specifics of it. Let me write that down. As far as I know, if it's a product, it's a product. But I don't know 100%. So, well, we'll leave it at that, and I'll write this down. I'm going to mute myself so you can't hear me type.
I think it's a stupid question just because I feel like I'm too lazy for not digging into. I'm sure it's in there somewhere. It's in the doc somewhere.
Sure. Do we have any questions from our newcomer, Hope? No? Are you finding this helpful? That's good. That's good.
Yes, thanks.
Sure.
Daniel, I've got a question to ask about documentation.
Okay, what's up?
Yeah, you sent out a link on the forum this week that the documentation's been changed or updated. It was labeled sample documentation.
What's that?
It was labeled sample documentation?
Yeah, so it's not that something was being changed. It's that I added an end-to-end PHP sample that showed you how to insert products in batch or individually, how to update, like pretty much every action you would want to do on your items using PHP. And I have one in Python that I published 3 weeks ago, and hopefully the .NET one will be published this week. I don't know if people saw all the commits made to the .NET library, but it's just a new guide. It's just augmentation rather than changes.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yep. You're a Java guy, though, right?
I am Java. That's right.
You don't care about the PHP.
I had a quick glance at the PHP. It looked good. It looked good.
Sure. Okay. So, do we have any other questions or concerns?
Hey, Danny,
yeah?
I do have a question. I know you kind of pushed me to go down the web server application route. It's still an additional step. I mean, you have to have them set up a merchant service account to get either the client secret and client ID or to get the private key, right?
No, I wasn't advocating you do that. Your application has a client ID and a client secret, and then your application performs OAuth 2 as
Gotcha. But then
service.
again, we would still need to have a master service account, right, to do that, or no?
No.
Because doesn't that account have to be attached to a merchant?
That doesn't have to be tied to your account at all.
Okay. Okay, that I was unfamiliar. Now I got it.
So what happens is you need to
That makes
sign
more
the
sense.
request on behalf of someone, right? So OAuth 2 is a way to get a token for doing the signing. So
Yep.
if you get a token on behalf of your users, it doesn't matter what account retrieved that token, right? It's a token for the user's account. And when you sign the request on behalf of your users, that's what that is. So you could use a Google account completely independent from the accounts you're using to manage everything else, but you could use that account for OAuth when you go through and set it up, and you'd be fine. So you need one client ID and one client secret for just you, and then from there you use that client ID and that client secret to actually construct the token
request. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then from there, there may even be a video online. I might try to track that down. But from there, your user just is presented with one page.
Yeah,
two
I think
pages
I've
if they're not
seen the
signed
page,
in.
or yeah, that where they agree to it and
Right,
and all that.
And it even says, because you specify the scope in the request, so it'll even say they're only wanting to access your content API for shopping data. So OAuth
Okay,
tokens are scoped tokens. So if you got an OAuth token and then you tried to access, let's say their calendar data, that would fail.
Right. Yeah, that's
So.
pretty clear from the documentation.
Yep.
So then, with that question in mind, say I'm using whatever generic Gmail account that I have
Right.
and I do the server-to-server. How am I able to access their accounts? The very last one.
I'm not familiar enough with server-to-server to tell you.
Because maybe there's enough trust in that original account. I don't know. I mean, it just seems, again, it seems ideal to not have to have their interaction, but it's just unclear from the documentation what that last one is.
So I don't understand how you're going to get their authorization without some interaction.
Well, that's what I'm asking you. The service-to-service account, if the private key generated is not associated with their account, then how is that an authorization? Because my understanding was they created the project account, they generate a private key that is for their merchant account, and then everything signed with their private key is golden.
I see. Okay.
So
yeah,
maybe we need a better understanding of how that
I'm
works.
not familiar enough with that flow. It is one of the more exotic ones out there for the utmost security. Yeah, I mean, it goes, like Andrew said, usually TLS is good enough, but that goes above and beyond.
Is there
I
somebody that
can look into
ask
it
that?
more for our next hangout if you like.
Yeah, or even just post on the forum,
Sure.
sort of how that. Cool, thanks.
Sure.
As well as if we go that direction, their response error is on purpose useless. It's just that didn't work. And I think that's so that you don't, try to hack it and keep trying to get the right answer, right? I think it's by design that it's a, obtuse error message, but having maybe more information as to why that's happening. I mean, it does appear to be used. There's enough people on forums talking about it. It's just, maybe it's only used for
individual accounts.
Or individual APIs that really don't contain any kind of sensitive data, and that's the whole point, too.
Okay.
I don't know. It's just not clear.
Yeah, I mean, especially with this API, all the data is intended to be user-facing, so we don't really care about encrypting it that much. User-facing via either commerce search or product search or product ad.
Right.
Some other destination.
I mean, the worst thing somebody could do is if they got your account is to get it shut off. I mean, and that's not good, but it's the worst they could really do.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm done beating that particular dead
horse. No, it's fine. It's very important. I think, especially with client login going away, it's important to understand how these flows work, but also that's sort of the new way authentication happens on the web with OpenID and OAuth. It's not just Google.
Right.
It's everybody. So, and with a lot of these libraries, client login was super duper easy. You just put in the account ID and the password, and you just go. Or that is the email, not the Merchant Center account ID. But I think that stuff's pretty dangerous. There was a talk last year at Google I/O called "Client Login Fail," going over all the ways where bad things can happen, and it is kind of scary having to send passwords around, and that's why we rely on these millennial flows rather than the old school.
Danny, I wanted to ask if anybody had seen this happen, and maybe I just need to double check, but it looks like when a product is posted, the Merchant Center console shows a created date time and an updated date time, and then at some point thereafter it switches over and says posted, right? And it doesn't say created or updated. It just changes the display.
I'm not familiar with the posted attribute, but
I think it might even be after the product is approved or something, but anyway, the display seems to change and it says posted. And then what I think I noticed, and I got to double check this, is that when it switches over to posted, the API starts returning an updated date time, but it doesn't tell you when the product was updated, the updated date time comes back as the current date time of the request. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know if anybody else noticed or not.
Huh. So I did ask about that before. You were asking about updated and published signatures changing.
Yeah.
The team says either that's a bug on our part, or that, or you're making some sort of changes before doing that you're not registering or realizing.
I need to double check. Let me check my stuff and make sure I'm right.
Yeah. I don't know the behavior of all this. Nobody's really noticed it. I'm not sure. But unless it's critical to your application, I'm not too worried about what the values are or not. I don't know if it is critical. You want to know when it ends up on product search or something like that. But
I think it sort of had to do with, I think originally what I was doing is I was comparing your date to when it was updated to my system's date.
Oh, that's
the
right.
product was updated. I was determining when I should fire an update. But
so that's sort of...
I do it internally now, so I keep track of when it was last modified.
Internally,
and then I compare it to the current time that I'm running to determine whether or not I should update. So
I would recommend doing that, and possibly even, maybe Andrew can talk about scalability a little bit, but possibly even saving responses for some predetermined amount of time, so you can go back through and get stuff out that you wanted. A lot for somebody like you, where you have an interaction with the user and a user is actually changing something in a database, it's not too difficult to have a database hook where you either add something to a queue or you immediately fire off a request.
Right.
So,
you're right.
I don't know if you wanted to make a comment, Andrew, about what you guys do or what you think of best practices for how long you should save responses or how often you should save responses or things like that.
It's kind of, for us, it's a little easier because we have so many different things that consume this product data that we actually already have a system where every change has a timestamp, and you can compare the last timestamp that you sent to the timestamp of when the change happened, but I keep separately a record of the last successful send. I don't query the data back from Google. I just assume if I got back a to something request or response, then like a 200 or 205, then the success or the change committed to Google, and I don't have to tell them about it again for another month or until another change happens. So.
Right.
Did you notice, Andrew, if the updated date time reflected the current time, or have you just never looked at it?
I haven't used the client API or the .NET framework for that, and I haven't looked at the responses.
He's just referring to they're in the Atom namespace, published, updated.
Yeah.
I think he's saying posted also. They're all in the Atom namespace, and they come back in the responses.
And I actually thought that was supposed to indicate like how fresh the data was, not when the data was changed in Google's database. But I might have. It was like a long time ago that I looked at that particular thing, but I thought that was to indicate when. So for like if you had a client that was getting multiple pieces of data or interacting in some way, so the current date time might actually be right in that case,
okay.
Or at least the date time of the request.
Like some crawl to a product page, you mean?
No, I was thinking like if you do an API request and it comes back with a timestamp on the response, I thought that was a timestamp for when the response. How fresh the data in the response was, not when the data changed in Google's database.
Okay.
But
well, I guess it doesn't matter that much. I mean,
I'm not sure.
I probably should let you know, Danny, if that's the case, if it is giving you the current date time, in case your engineers had really meant that field to mean the last time it was updated in your system, just in case it comes up in the future.
Let me experiment here. I'm going to use our demo and actually just make make a request and find out what happens. I will share the screen in a second. Actually, no, I won't. I don't want to reveal my account ID, unfortunately. Sorry.
Man, I have my pen all ready, too.
Actually,
well, it goes on YouTube, so it's never gone.
I think it might be relevant to mention if the account IDs. I know everybody in the forum spends a lot of time trying to hide them. They're actually not very secret. You could get them off of the Google Merchant, or you can get them off of the shopping search.
Sure.
And actually, they're also somewhat sequential, so you can kind of guess. I feel like the last number has some repetition in it, but the rest of them are pretty sequential.
Sure.
But yeah, I know there's people who are like, I don't want to know. I don't want people to know what I've been posting.
Yeah, so I am noticing that the updated timestamp reflects the current time, and the published timestamp did not change. But I don't know what the implications of that are. And I don't see a posted timestamp, but this account doesn't really have anything posted. So, suspicion confirmed. Something's agreed.
Yeah, but that's not.
So, do we have any other questions, or are we going to wrap up?
Daniel, just a quick one about OAuth.
I'm good. Thanks.
Sure.
Sorry, Daniel. Sorry, just a quick question about the OAuth. I've had a quick glance at the documentation. It's great you've got it in the PHP OAuth 2. I just had a glance at the Java, and it says coming soon.
Yeah. So I didn't write the Java one, and that was actually in reference to OAuth 1, I assume. It's on my list of things to do. I just finished the other 3 guides because they didn't exist. The Java one has existed for months.
Yeah, it's okay. It wasn't. Just a comment, really. I wasn't chasing you. It was just
but there is. I don't know if you're using the client library or which client library you're using, but it's. They have instructions within the source. So if you're using the Google API Java client or whatever I can't remember the name 100% off the top of my head, but if you're using that one,
yeah, I should be able to.
And you go to the wiki, there's a long OAuth 2 wiki explaining exactly what you want to do.
Thanks.
Sure. Alrighty. Well, I'll see you guys again in 2 weeks. I will make an announcement relatively soon whether or not I'll be having somebody as a guest star. And I will post some of these questions that we had, like this published or not question, and what the relevance of the keys are, and server-to-server things, and then also about getting an approval for an MCA without an e-commerce site. So
yeah, I'll send you the email I have just so you have what we were looking for.
Alrighty.
Thanks, Danny.
Have a nice day, everybody. See ya.
See ya.